Joe. You're going first. Yes. All right. So we're starting the next session. Everyone, please take seat. Thank you so much. All right. So this session is Project Showcase. We focus on residential and small commercial building technologies. And then there's a parallel session in the other building on the larger commercial and campus technologies. My name is Jingjing Liu. I'm a technology researcher here at the lab. I manage CalFlexHub, so many of you know me. So today we have four excellent panelists. We have Joe Borg, Vice President from Olivine. We have Pierre Delforge, Head of Product and Operations from Harvest Thermal. We have John Powers, Founder and CSO of Elexity, and my colleague Peter Grant, a Senior Technology Researcher at the lab. So next slide, please. We have been doing a lot of technology demonstration work in CalFlexHub. As you can see, we have 21 active or completed demonstration projects spread across over 100 sites, and almost half of them are happening at these disadvantaged communities. So we're very proud of that. And we have a few new sites coming up as well, and a really large EV demonstration project, actually led by Olivine, coming up as well. And here's a little bit distribution of the type of buildings on the right in this table. As you can see, so we kind of color match, the green part of that circle represent residential sector. So that's a big focus of CalFlexHub. And we have small amount of projects happening. John actually going to be talking about one of them about small commercial sectors, and the blue part of the ring is happening on the across the street. So next slide, please. So each of our some 20 projects find their own way of receiving dynamic pricing signal, as well as digesting that and converting it into some sort of a control signals, passing down to the load flexible DR devices. So here's a architecture diagram on the right that I won't dive into, but in CalFlexHub, we started looking at the trade-off and some of the long-term implications of these different ways of receiving and responding to dynamic price signals. And that is summarized in a recent ACEEE paper that the team put together. So I can share that if there's interest. And we also focus a lot on looking at the flexible load impact from these demonstration projects. So each of our speaker will dive into that for their own project that we're highlighting. But there are some of the high-level takeaways here that I'm going to quickly go through. So in general, we have seen that the EV charging technology and the integrated heat pump systems that Pierre will talk about, these technologies have shown ability to leverage the energy storage to shift load over several hours. That is very impactful. And then model predictive controls, like my colleague Peter here and others have done a lot of excellent work using model predictive controls to shift significant load in large commercial buildings and campus. We have seen some very impressive results in that regard. And then on the residential and small commercial building side, we all know that HVAC, we can only, have the temperature rise for so long. During those short period of time, these projects have shown very impactful results. And it's a matter of how to aggregate them for a more impact results if longer load shed is needed from the grid. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe to talk about his
All right. Thank you, Jing Jing. And if I'm correct, I think this is isn't this the same panel we had last year? Almost exactly. So no, that's good because now you can see what we've been up to um, in the last year. Yeah, give you an update. Um, so Olivine has 5 different demonstration projects that we're doing on CalFlexHub, and I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. Both of them are around residential smart thermostats. And if you were here last year, you probably saw me talk about the Ecobee testing that we did and the results there. And now I want to kick it off and talk about the Emerson, the Sensi Smart Thermostat. So it's actually Copeland now. They've rebranded. It's Copeland, but it's Sensi Smart Thermostats. And you can see here they have this is the old model in white and the newer model in the black. And I don't know if you can see there's a little green piggy bank down there on the bottom, which shows that an event is happening or a load shifting event is happening at this moment. And so we went out when we recruited about 38, we recruited 30 customers with 38 thermostats. So some of the customers had more than one thermostat in their home. We did get quite a few customers that were on the larger side in terms of homes than we normally see. And so we didn't necessarily target. I'll get a little bit in the Q&A about this, but we didn't target any low income or DAC customers. But we got about half of our participants came from DAC and low income without actually targeting them, which we thought was fantastic. So next slide, please. So this is the communication architecture. This is one of the benefits of going first. You're going to see variations of this slide about 9 more times today. And this is our communication architecture where we use the CalFlexHub price server. We ingest that into our Olivine DERMS platform, the Olivine DER. And then we use our control logic to create functional control signals. And so it's a cloud-to-cloud integration. And we send that over to Copeland, who then sets the functional commands to the thermostat. Now, one of the differences between the Ecobee project we did last year and the Sensi project this year is that the Ecobee customers could set their own set points in terms of how much they want to change the set point for pre-cooling versus a load reduction period. And the Sensi platform didn't have that capability for the customers to do that. So the main difference is that we were able to pick the set points. And ironically, coincidentally, we didn't plan it this way, but it turned out that the customers, when they set their set points, turned out to be exactly what we used in this study. So I thought that was a fascinating kind of result of this, is that customers set their own set points at a level that we thought was appropriate as well. So they didn't try and get the incentive money and only go, oh, I'll pre-cool 1 degree and decrease 1 degree. They really took it seriously. Next slide, please. So this is the field test number 1, the summer test. We started in late July and went into August, early August. And one of the key things, we didn't plan it this way, but it turned out we were in the middle of a heat wave when we were doing this testing. And you can see that we wanted to do 2 things. First week, we wanted to test with pre-cooling for a 2-hour period. And then next, we wanted to do no pre-cooling with a 2-hour period and see, A, what is the difference in the impacts of the load reduction? And B, did we get any comments or complaints about not pre-cooling? And the answer to the second one is no, we didn't get any complaints. But we did see a significant snapback when we didn't pre-cool. And so we also saw, you can see the black line is the baseline. And so it looks like the level of snapback is similar, but it is above the baseline, and the duration is longer of the snapback without pre-cooling. So that was an interesting thing. We expected to see that, but it proved out. And then also without the pre-cooling, you could see there was a little bit of an increase in usage of the AC throughout the 2-hour period. It wasn't able to keep up as well, which is what we expected. But as you can see, and I think this is on an earlier slide, there definitely was a clear response a measurable response from this, and that customers on an individual basis were saving, about $2 per the event. So which is not insignificant. Next slide, final slide. I've got 1 minute left. So the smart thermostat response comparison. So this shows you the difference between the Sensi and the ecobee test. And again, one of the big differences was it was during a heat wave. If you look at the scatter plot down here, you can see to the right in the Sensi test, I mean, there's a number of thermostat events that were well above 100 degrees compared to when we did the eco. But when you get below 95 degrees, you can see there's some very similar patterns of response and load impacts from the two tests. And so in the end, the results were surprisingly similar. I didn't really expect to see that. But one of the things is that I think it was primarily because of the hotter weather and the larger homes that, so this is the load reduction, right? This is not the load. And you can see that the Sensis were losing a little bit of their load reduction over time and had to run that air conditioning more. And I think that was primarily because of the heat wave and the larger homes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pierre.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe, for the great presentation and time management.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. So Harvest, next slide, please. Harvest Thermal, or Harvest in short, we are an integrated heating, cooling, hot water system with thermal energy storage. We participated in CalFlexHub in cycle 2 and demonstrated the ability to shift load on a dynamic price signal. And in cycle 4, we are demonstrating the accessibility and the implementation of this technology in a multifamily building. So this is a 6-unit garden-style apartment in San Jose. You have a picture of the building here. You can see the outdoor closets, which have the gas water heaters today. And we are replacing those gas water heaters, and which serve both gas and heating in this particular situation, with a Harvest system. The timeline is that it's still in progress. We wish we'd be able to deploy it in time for the symposium, but the contract is underway. It's being installed next month, and we'll be testing in November to January. Next, please. So the communication architecture is that the Harvest pod, which is basically the smart controller for the system, receives the dynamic price signal via an internet access, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And this controller, it processes the price signal and determines when to charge the thermal energy storage on the lowest prices and when to discharge it on the highest prices. This is basically a smart thermal battery with a capacity of 7 kWh and dispatched twice a day in the winter, so dispatching up to 14 kWh a day, which is more than you would get typically from a Tesla Powerwall because they don't typically dispatch the 100%. And this allows us to save around 30% on energy costs on the time of use, and based on, depending on the real-time pricing, in cycle 2, we estimate about 50% cost reduction for heating and hot water cost on real-time pricing. And we are able to shift around 90% of both the space heating and the water heating load off-peak on time of use, and about 70% on a real-time price. Next, please. So the challenges that we found so far, and it's not finished, we haven't installed it yet, but the main challenges in multifamily is particularly low-income or moderate-income multifamily, is that we are dealing with two parties. The property owner, we have to convince and recruit the property owner, and the tenants, and we need them to enroll in the pilot, right? Which is more complicated than when you deal with a single-family, owner-occupied property. And there's a split incentive between the homeowner, who is driven primarily by first cost, and the tenants, who stand to benefit from the cost savings of the system and of demand flexibility. We've been fortunate to work with two forward-looking organizations, Association for Energy Affordability, AEA, and Eden Housing, the property owner, who care deeply about energy affordability and have been willing to work with us on this pilot. But in order to scale this in the market, we're going to need the incentives that make sure that this is cost competitive on a first cost basis with alternative technologies. And then we'll need to have the tariffs and make sure that we, the tenants and the users actually benefit from the system capabilities and the demand flexibility. The second challenge that we faced is that tenants, we're going to optimize the system for the real-time price, but the tenants still pay the time of use, and they're not completely aligned. So when you optimize for time of use for real time, you're going to be suboptimal for time of use, and you're going to increase cost for tenants during the test period. It's only 2 weeks. We estimated it's about $5 or less than $5. So it's not huge, but from a tenant perspective, who are very price sensitive as being LMI customers, it's very important that we build the trust, and they're not worried they're going to pay more because of otherwise they won't participate. So we decided to offer gift cards to more than offset that price penalty, that cost penalty, and ensure that they participate. And the jury is still out whether that's going to work. We'll see when we actually, once we've contracted the project, we'll reach out to the tenants to enroll them. And then the connectivity has been a challenge. I was talking to Subrajit who's also doing an integrated system earlier, and they're having the same challenge, is that it's difficult to rely on tenant Wi-Fi. It's possible in single-family homes. In multifamily homes, it's much more difficult. It's not as reliable. It's not durable. So we've had to work with the property owner to have either property level Wi-Fi access or wired access, or work with cellular internet access. Next, please. I'm running short of time here. So the key learnings is, as Jingjing said in her opening comments, we can shift most of the space and water heating load off-peak. It has a major potential to reduce tenants' energy burden, which is really important in LMI communities. And in order to scale this technology, we need incentives, not just for heat pumps, which are great. We love heat pump incentives, but also for demand flexibility to value and encourage demand flexibility adoption. And then the tariffs that will drive the value stream, the value for customers to use this technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Please, John.
All right. I'm John Powers with Alexity, and 6 minutes goes fast. So let's get to it. Next slide. So advantage of going third is we don't really have to talk too much about all this. We also are doing a demonstration project in a commercial facility, 2 at UC Davis. Our partners at the Davis California Lighting Technology Center did the M&V, which we'll get to in a second, and provided 2 buildings. I spoke last year about the CLTC building, and now we'll talk about the Facilities Services building at UC Davis, where we have our Alexity gateway and some Pelican thermostats. Next slide. So the communication architecture looks like a lot of the other ones. I want to stress that when we do prices to devices, we don't. The device is the Alexity gateway, not the individual thermostat, and I'll explain why in just a few minutes. But we send signals to lots of different thermostats all around the same building in order to provide load shifting capability through some of the same techniques we were just talking about. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. So here's some cool results that our UC Davis partners gave us, which is, you can see a day, we did a simple A/B test. We did days with control and days with the default control that the building was already operating, and days with Alexity optimized control. And the temperatures on the 2 days are very comparable. What did Joe say? We didn't really intend this. Oh, yes, we did. It's Davis. It's hot all the time in Davis in the summertime. We did intend to have hot days to compare, and we compare some hot days here. Both of these days are very, sort of 98-degree days. And the Alexity control on the left is delivering much better energy and especially demand performance than the default control on the right. We can go into how we did that, but we did. So I want to take a minute and take a look at the price signal, because we talk about a building being a thermal battery, right? People use that phrase all the time, but no, it's not. I can't charge this building over here where it's cheap and then discharge the building up here where it's expensive, can I? No, we have to charge the building where it's sort of expensive and discharge the building where it's very expensive, if it's even occupied during those times. So getting the prices right is especially important for HVAC-driven programs. If in California, our peak is driven by the sun going down and the air conditioners all still being on, oh yeah, it is, then we have to structure our prices to map the policy that we're trying to improve. If we want this kind of load shifting from this kind of price signal, we may have to do something about that. And I'll get to that on the next slide too. Next slide. Key learnings from this are that commercial buildings are awesome. So the thing about commercial buildings, especially when compared to residential buildings, is not only do they have higher thermal mass, I think we all understand that right away. A commercial building, even a small one, is much bigger than my house, probably yours. But also, there are more opportunities to diversify across the package units in a typical small to medium commercial building. What a beautiful building. We're trying to recruit this one into a different program. This is way bigger than the one we're working on. But look at this building. Imagine how you could do load shifting in this building compared to a residential facility with one air conditioner. So I can turn half those air conditioners off and then turn the other half off and the first half back on and keep the building moderately cool for hours. Now, how many hours depends on the thermal integrity of the building. We look at a LEED certified platinum building with lots of mass as a 5-hour battery. We look at a drafty barn as a half-hour battery. And we look at a typical building as a 2 to 3 hour battery, depending on the, size and complexity of the facility. But the coordination of the units is the key for reducing demand and for shifting energy. So when we say things like prices to devices, let's be clear what the device is in the commercial sector. We're not sending a price to the dishwasher and a price to the water heater and a price to the air conditioner like we fantasize about in residential, which is a fantasy if you ask me. We're sending a price signal to a device that can coordinate all the other devices properly. Because if I just told each one of those package units, the price just went way up, what would they all do? They all turn off at once. And the customer would drop out of the program and write an angry letter. Whereas if you send it to our intelligent controller or someone else's, but I prefer ours, you can send different signals to each unit in the building, maintain comfort, which is number one for the customer, and still deliver load flexibility. So I think I'm there. So I'll save the other conclusions for questions.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, John. Right. Well, and just one quick comment before I dive into my talk. I will comment, John, we could resolve your problem by adding thermal energy storage. So we should talk about those collaborations. So our next project, next slide, please, is focused on price responsive control of 120 volt heat pump water heaters. And for those who don't spend 40 hours a week thinking about their water heater, which I imagine is most people out there, I will point out that the 120 volt product is considered a really important decarbonization tool because they're designed to plug into a standard wall outlet, whereas a traditional 240 volt heat pump water heater, if you're trying to replace a gas water heater, you probably have to pay an electrician $3,000 to $5,000 to make that possible. We can just skip that with the 120 volt products. So these products we have installed out in the field. We did field monitoring at 10 sites. communicating using the CTA 2045 protocol. Some manufacturers have Wi-Fi capabilities, so that's an option. We didn't use it for this project. So in this case, the intelligence is in the cloud, and then it identifies CTA 2045 signals to send and sends them via either Wi-Fi or cellular to the CTA 2045 module, which is hardwired into the water heater. And that's how we establish the communication. Next slide, please. Now, the real innovation here is that we created an algorithm that's responsive to both the electricity prices and to the behavior of the occupants on site, right? Historically, load shifting with water heaters was done by somebody creating an engineered solution that's deployed to all water heaters in a fleet on all days. And that works pretty well if you have pretty static electricity prices, but in a highly dynamic pricing scenario, that means somebody creates a new engineered solution every single day, and I think we all know that's not going to happen. So we needed an algorithm. Additionally, people behave differently in different homes. And so you can envision some people are high morning users, some people are high evening users, and some people just don't use much at all. So the lowest cost control algorithm is going to be different in different houses. So what we did was we created an algorithm that responds to both the prices and the hot water consumption and electricity consumption to send customized CTA 2045 signals out to different water heaters on different days. And when you do that, you can generate pretty much whatever load curve you want. In this case, we pretty much matched it to the solar production curve in the state of California. And in this scenario, that reduced the operating cost of the water heaters by about 29% and shifted 77% of the load out of the high price period. So there's a lot of potential there. Next slide, please. So that prior data was simulation. This is now field study results showing what happened when we tested it with the water heaters out in the field. We had 10 products, all in single family homes here in the state of California. And I'll comment that they communicated via CTA 2045, not CTA 2045B, which means they did not have the advanced load up command. And I'll talk about why that's important in a minute. And so in this case, we did testing on the CalFlexHub summer highly dynamic price schedule. And we were able to shift 52% of the load out of the high price period into lower price times of day, while reducing the operating cost of the water heaters by 46%. So there's a lot of potential there. Next slide, please. But those water heaters did not have the advanced load up command. Not all products support it. And the advanced load up command enables you to increase the temperature of water in the tank above the user specified set point. So you have more storage and you can do a better job of shifting load. So we went back to the simulation environment to ask ourselves, how much impact does that make? And when we ran the simulations, we found that having advanced load up, no surprise, lets you run the heat pump more during the low price time of day to increase storage, which enables you to increase more of the solar electricity that we tend to overproduce in California. Then because you have more energy stored in the tank, you're able to do a better job of shifting load away from the high price period later in the day. Oh, and all that extra electricity you consumed earlier in the day, well, that's really cheap electricity, so it doesn't actually impact how much people pay much at all. So with the advanced load up command in this simulated case, oh, sorry, let me start that sentence over. In the simulated case, without the advanced load up command, we estimated that you could reduce people's bills by 32%. With the advanced load up command, we estimated that you could reduce people's bills by 53%. So another 2/3 savings on top. Meanwhile, you're also reducing the peak kilowatt hours consumption from a 29% reduction to a 60% reduction. So this is really important. I can't stress that enough. Next slide, please. So this is just key learnings, wrapping it up and moving on to the next steps in our development process. So really one of the keys here is that price responsive control of heat pump water heaters is possible with current technology today. We can do a good job of this now. If products enable the advanced load up command and if the controls make use of it, we can do a better job still. So that's something that I think we should really strive to achieve more adoption of. And also, this is really important. Large changes in price yield better results. I only had one result slide in there, so this story's not told that clearly, but we also looked at time of use prices that had a difference of like 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. No surprise, people saved 5 to 10% instead of 30 to 50. We shifted 30% of load instead of 60. So it's still possible, but it's not as good. We need to look at how we design rates to make sure we're encouraging this. Also, I'd like to point out that the CTA 2045 communication module costs a couple $100, has to be shipped to the site, needs to be manually installed, and this is kind of a barrier to adoption. If we can make it something that is free, already installed when the water heater comes out of the box, it's a lot easier to scale this up. And I'd like to talk a little bit about this figure we have on the slide. So we have developed a working group where we're collaborating with Pacific Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison, as well as other researchers, to start transferring this to their utility programs. And on the left side, we've got the algorithm development, as well as field testing, including work around time of use rates, which was part of the Store for Build project that DOE funded. So thank you for that, Sven. And we have coming up in the future laboratory testing funded by Southern California Edison, so we can demonstrate the value of this to manufacturers, really get them excited to be on board. And this is all working to get to the point where it's easy for utilities to include this in their load shifting programs. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, so I have a few questions for our panelists before we open it up to questions from the audience. First, it's a really important one. How do each of you think about the current incentives that exist to support the adoption of these technologies? Do you feel like there's sufficient, or there's really lacking? And if it's not sufficient, what does it really take? So can we start from you, Joe?
Sure. I think when we're talking about dynamic rates and even some of the pilots that are occurring, I think the incentives are too low. I think especially, for somebody like an olivine ASP that's kind of in the middle between a technology provider and a utility. And I think we saw earlier where we're talking about, 0.5% of the energy bill savings from the dynamic pilots. It makes it tough to get people to sign up for these programs at these levels. So I think really where we need to go to, it's not just about increasing incentives. I think it also gets to rethinking the way that utilities make money, right? Coming down to the idea of, performance-based rulemaking, where instead of utilities always getting paid for increasing their wires and their poles, ability to make similar rates of return on investing in distributed energy resources that can respond to dynamic signals and provide additional benefits like things like non-wires alternatives and avoiding upgrades on the distribution system.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my talk, I think we're starting to do well with heat pump incentives, and our technology is heat pump based, so this is important. We're getting there with IR rebates launching soon and tech getting refunded. We are starting to see heat pump water heater programs, both requirements for flexibility, capability, as well as programs like Water Saver. We're not seeing significant incentives in HVAC yet, and this is important, to if we want to grow HVAC flexibility, that we provide, we accelerate adoption, right? Adoption is going to be a virtual cycle, but we need to jumpstart it, and we need to lean in to have really generous, rich incentives initially to jumpstart the market and create that 20-year adoption curve that we want to see, just like solar, rooftop solar grew because it had good incentives and had good ROI, and that's what we need to see, both from the incentive part and the rate part, highly differentiated opt-in rates that can really drive value for the customer and drive demand.
Sure, I'll take a more commercial sector view. Alexity works primarily for the commercial customer. We do some utility pilots just to demonstrate the technology, but mostly we work directly for commercial customers. And from my perspective, the thing that's ignored in a lot of utility programs is controls. And we can talk about the replacement cycle for equipment all we want. We can all wish that customers would suddenly change their behavior and suddenly replace expensive capital equipment because the utility wants them to. But really, once they've bought a heat pump, or once they've bought a package unit, they're going to operate it for as long as it lasts. And what we need is incentives to operate them more flexibly and more efficiently. So the way we've done energy efficiency programs since Marianne and I took classes at UC Berkeley, has been we pay incentives for stuff. And the stuff needs to be heavy and it needs to hurt if you drop it on your foot. And that's not the load flexibility world. Energy efficiency is about hardware, load flexibility is about software. You have to operate what's already there in a way that is more responsive to the price signals that we're getting. So I don't think it's that there isn't enough being spent. I think it's being spent on the wrong things. Load flexibility requires different kinds of program design than energy efficiency of the last century. So we need more incentives to control things better and less, if it needs to come from somewhere, less incentive for random capital improvements that customers don't want.
Got one.
Cool.
So when it comes to water heaters, there's really kind of two challenges to get this adopted, right? One is most water heaters are natural gas, right? So we have to convince people to switch from natural gas to heat pumps in the first place. And then second is, how attractive is it for people to implement load flexibility? We have a lot of really good incentives to convince or to help with the first costs of installing the water heater and get people to make that switch to heat pumps. But currently, with our electricity and gas prices what they are, it's more expensive to run a heat pump than it is to run a gas water heater. And so we have to overcome that challenge. Then on the operational side, to adopt demand flexibility, right? We have time of use rates, which, as I mentioned, give a minor benefit, but honestly, I don't think our time of use rates give enough benefit to really get people excited to participate, which comes to the point that I think the highly dynamic prices that we're working with in CalFlexHub really show a lot of potential, right? Because you can get people significant bill savings if they load shift, so they want to load shift. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but I pointed out that some of those prices in the CalFlexHub HDP were about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Compare that to the about 45 that I'm paying right now, and boy, suddenly it's cheaper to run a heat pump than it is to run a natural gas water heater. So, this kind of solves both problems. I'd also add that in addition to incentives, I think we need to work a lot on socialization and building trust. I talk to my friends and my neighbors about highly dynamic prices and automated demand flexibility and minimizing your bill. And some of them say, no way, right? We need to get this out there. We need to really demonstrate that it works and that it reduces people's bills while giving them the results that they want. And we need to build trust. And I think that's a very important step.
Great. So besides incentives, what else do you all see that as critical to help increase the adoption of your technologies at a much larger scale? Who wants to go first?
I could go first. I guess I
Please.
went rogue on the last question and already answered this one. So I'm just killing time until somebody else looks like they want my microphone, basically. Here you go, John.
Yeah, I mean, I teed this up with the pointing at the price curve and talking about HVAC. So the big, again, my first job out of college was in the rates department of a utility, so I know how that sausage gets made. There are an infinite number of ways to recover costs over the course of a load curve. And if we want HVAC to shift away from the peak, we have to make the delta in price between the peak and the adjacent to the peak bigger. And we should not worry about how closely that tracks the wholesale market price, because more than half the cost comes from the distribution, and you can recover the distribution charge, I'll just say, however you want. And so if we can design rates in a way that the price differential, just like you were saying on water heaters, price differential actually matches the things we're trying to shift, then we'll get people adopting. And if we can't, we'll get people going, wouldn't that be nice? And, so I'm an economist. I believe in prices. And I believe that the comments made earlier about publishing the historical dynamic prices, super important, because enrolling a customer in a program like this requires you to explain what they will save. We're not talking about what you will save tomorrow. What you will save tomorrow is an operational decision, but a participation decision is what will I save over the next 5 or 10 years or for the life of the investment that I'm about to make. So we need predictable, big differential prices to make this work. Beyond that, we need enablement money, just like energy efficiency money, to go to the end customer to say, put in better controls, put in better sort of communication gear to make your sleepy old equipment actually as flexible as it could be.
For Harvest, we are less concerned about reshaping that load curve, although I completely understand why, why it makes sense. But with thermal energy storage, we have, we can shift up to 9 hours of load in the evening, so we don't have that issue. But I want to second Peter's point about the dynamic range of rates. If we just vary generation and we don't vary distribution and transmission, the price signal is not sufficient to create sufficient value to drive adoption. I think the CalFlexHub rates are kind of ideal, and they go really low if you can pay. It's not just the differential, but it's how low can you get in the middle of the day so that you can absorb all that really cheap energy, store it, and not have to pay the higher prices. And I think that's going to require going further on rate design than what we've seen. I mean, I haven't seen the real-time pilots, but from what I've heard from the previous panel, I don't think the current real-time rate prices in the pilots will drive sufficient demand or have a sufficient price signal to drive adoption.
I don't have a whole lot more to add to that, other than the fact that I think if we don't address this issue of increased transparency in what is in the rates and a better differential that you can optimize around, I think we do run the risk of people just signing up for these programs and aren't going to do anything because there's bill protection, and then say, well, I'll just see what I get, right? Because there is no risk. I think we need to really incentivize people through the rates so that they will respond and really do make a difference and have a load impact.
All right, thank you. It seems like a pretty strong theme here in your all responses, and I think a lot of coordination to do with our rate making people in the room. So I'll say one question for now and see how many questions we have online. So Scott,
We've got 4, but
right.
2 of them are directed to Harvest Thermal, so we could make it 3.
Okay. If you can pick two of those for us, and then we'll also see how many questions we have in the room. How about that?
Okay, sure thing. Pierre, can you speak to the difference in load shifting opportunity that Harvest has seen in the summertime versus the wintertime?
Yes, it's a great question. So in summertime, you obviously have little heating load, and to be clear, our solution currently only does heat load shifting, not cooling load shifting. Heating and hot water are about 6 times as much energy than cooling, typically on average in the US. So that's where you have the highest ROI, and that's where we started. So in summer, the only load there is to shift is hot water. And it's typically, at least in single family homes, it's the smaller of the 2 loads. In multifamily, it's actually the most significant load to shift. So I think the answer depends. In single family homes, the majority of load shifting is going to happen in the winter, where you can have 2 shift cycles, mornings and evenings. Whereas in summer, it's going to be largely a 1 shift cycle a day, driven by how much domestic hot water there is to shift.
All right, and the next one is related to the Sensi program. How many events did you call per month?
So we are going to be doing at least 3 test periods. And so what I presented earlier was the first test period, which is a 2-week period. And it was 3 days per week, two weekdays and 1 weekend day. And so one with pre-cool and one without. So 6. So that would be, on an average, be 12 per month.
Great. Any questions from the room? Wei Ping.
Hey, my name is Wei Ping, and I have a question about like HVAC and load shifting. So, let's say like you want to increase the cooling set point by 2 degrees within a 1 hour window. So, in my opinion, instead of like immediately increase the 2 degrees for the whole hour, maybe we should like increase by like 0.5 degrees every 15 minutes. And then after the event ends, then like instead of like lowering by 2 degrees immediately, we like lower like by 0.5, like for like every 15 minutes, such that like we can like make the controls much simpler. Like like you don't have to like turn off half of the equipment, but you can turn on and turn off like all the equipment to do that. Like so that would be, in my mind, is the easiest option. So what would be the problem with my approach?
Yeah, I think the more nuanced temperature adjustment strategies, actually, Marianne has led some of the work in the past, so we can sort of get you familiar with some of that past work, but I'll also let John and Joe to comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. So if you think of model predictive control, what you're really doing is in our case anyway, we're defining a range in which we commit to keep the temperatures. So we're not using a fixed set point that says, I'm going to increase it by 2 right now. What we're doing is saying we commit to keep within the range that you give us, and we will optimize the use of energy in each zone over the horizon of basically a day. And the result of that is something very similar to what you're saying, is the set points that the algorithm creates tend to creep up in small increments in different zones over time, so that you're not turning everything off at once or turning everything on at once. You're starting, everybody's seen this graph. You're starting the day a little bit cooler and ending the day a little bit warmer than if you just had a nice flat single set point. And that shifts energy away from the most expensive times of day. And it also uses more energy or delivers more cooling in the more efficient times to operate the units earlier in the day. So that's sort of the way we've in general operated the buildings that we're in. Does that help? Okay.
I'll say that in the residential sector, I think things are a little bit different because we work through vendor control platforms, right? So we don't have that ability to do, that level of optimization that you're talking about. So in the case of Ecobee, the customers set their own set points, right, on how they want to respond to either DR events or load shifting through dynamic rates. And then similarly with the Sensi, we have to give them the set points ourselves, right? And so I think there is an argument, particularly for the residential sector, that keeping it simple works. And I think that, if you see the graphs that I presented, there was some, variation of when the AC was coming on and shutting off, coming on and shutting off. And so, but it did give us the overall load reduction that we wanted. So I think it's for residential, particularly, I'd say keep it simple.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Albert, please.
I think there are many different strategies to do load shifting on HVAC, especially using thermostat. I do also want to mention it's depends on the purpose of that specific event. There is time that if that smart thermostat is signed up to an emergency demand response program, then with CalISO dispatch time, we may not have the luxury to gradually reduce the load of a smart thermostat, right? So I'm just giving an example. If you know, if there's a real-time pricing in the future, or if there's a DR event, we only have 15 minutes notification time from ISO that they need the load right, you know, the dispatch is at 6:15 and then they need it by 6:30. Then obviously, right, we don't have the luxury to gradually reduce the thermostat temperature. Like, you know, so I think it's going to be, although obviously, you know, that impact customer more, right? You know, gradually temperature setting will have better customer experience. But then at the same time, I just want to point out that the need of that events and the agreement with that smart firms that also contribute to the different strategies that we can use, you know, toward the specific, not just thermostat, but battery, you know, EV and all kinds of technologies.
So Kula, do we want to, yeah, save transition time? That's great. Let's thank our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining the residential and small commercial panel. I really appreciate your participation, as well as the people that presented. We have one more session before lunch here in this room. Sarah Smith is going to be presenting the Valuing the CalFlexHub technology. So this is, if you step back and look at the statewide value and the customer value. And then Angela Sanguinetti from UC Davis is going to be presenting the usability assessments over in Building 91. So we'll start that session at noon. And thanks so much. We'll see you back in the next session.